Welcome back to Musicians Edition. Today we're going to be talking about flams and drags, but instead of talking about them on the drum, we're going to talk about how to read them on snare drum music. Okay, so we'll talk about the execution of these notes in other videos, but today I just want to cover what they're going to look like on the page and how to interpret what you see into what we're then going to talk about on the instrument in a later video. Okay, so anytime we're talking about flams or drags, everything is centered around what we call the primary note, right? The primary note is going to look like a regular quarter note, half note, eighth note, 16th note, whatever it is, okay? Now, the flam or the drag is going to be an ornament to this note, right? Or kind of you can think of it as a decoration to this note, right? You'll hear it commonly referred to as an ornament, okay? So when we see a flam, right? So we've got our quarter note here. When we see a flam, it's just going to be a little bitty note in front of it, usually with a slash on it, sometimes not, and then it's going to be tied into that note, okay? Now, any other instrument, when they saw something like this, they would interpret that as a grace note, right? And we talk about that a little bit in our flam video, but the idea is that this is a little note that comes right before this big note, okay? So if we put that in in another context, right? If we put it on a half note, it would work the same way. It would just look like this, sometimes with a slash through it, sometimes not, and then tied into it, okay? That's just going to tell us to play one little note right before the primary note, okay? If we put that into even more context, right, if we put it into like 2 eighth notes, we might see it written like this, right, something like that, okay? Into 16th notes, it's going to look like this. Okay. Now this just tells me there's a flam on that note, right? A flam on that note. Okay. Only the note that it's tied to. The rest of these, it doesn't change anything, right? It just changes how we play this note right here. Okay. Now it's also possible that on like this group of 2 eighth notes here, we might have a flam on each of them, right? So that would tell me that I'm going to play a flam. I'm going to play 2 flams in a row, right? Sometimes you'll even see it inside a group of 16th notes. Something like this, right? That would tell me I'm only going to play a flam on this second 16th note. Not the first one or the last 2, right? But just that one that the little note is tied to, okay? We talked about this in our other video just a little bit as well. But when we refer to a flam as being on the right hand or on the left hand, that refers to which hand is playing the primary note, right? So if you saw something like this, right, that's going to tell me that I'm going to play a right-handed flam, which means the right hand plays the primary note, and then your left hand is going to play the grace note. But we call this right-handed, okay? The opposite works the same way, right? If we have a quarter note flam here, and then an L here, we'd have a R there. This would tell me to play a left-handed flam, which means our left hand plays the primary note, right hand plays the grace note. Okay? So these are all flams. Okay? Now, what we call drags, or sometimes you'll hear them called ruffs, right? There's kind of different terminology depending on who you're talking to. Some people get real specific about which one's a drag, which one's a ruff. It honestly doesn't really matter all that terribly much. But for right now, we're just going to call them drags. Okay. You'll see them the exact same way, except the exact same way that you'll see flams written, except that there will be 2 of them, right? 2 little notes. Often they're written as 16ths. Okay. And like this, something like that. Okay. And we'll do a separate video to talk about how to actually play that, right? But all the same concepts apply, right? It can be on an eighth note, right? All the same stuff you see on the Flam portion of this page. The only difference here is that there are two of them instead of one. Okay. Again, this brings up a matter of interpretation. Sometimes we'll play these two notes as two actual notes, two distinct notes, or sometimes we'll play them as a buzz stroke, right? Again, we'll cover that in the other video. Okay. Now, when we refer to which hand we're playing on, it's the exact same rule as the Flams, right? Left hand drag means that your left hand plays the primary note. Your right hand is going to play the grace notes. Okay. Now, if we made this one right hand, then the left hand would play the grace notes. We would call this a right hand drag. Now, next up, what I've always heard referred to as Ruffs. Sometimes these two terms are a little bit interchangeable, right? But the idea here is that we're playing three notes in front of the primary note. Again, same rules apply, right? If we play this hand with the right, we call that a right-handed ruff or drag, whatever, okay? Now, these get a little bit tricky because again, it's kind of an interpretation thing, right? We'll talk about this in the drag and ruff video later on, but you can play these as two rights and a left, right? Or a buzz stroke and a left, right? These, a lot of times you'll want to separate these out a little bit so we get three distinct notes, right? So sometimes people will play a right-handed ruff as, I'm just going to write these up here so we don't get too jumbled up down here, as left, right, left, and then primary note is on your right. Okay, so those, we're kind of singling out each of these instead of playing any double strokes, right? Another very popular way of executing those would be to play one hand and then a double stroke, right? So if this were let's say this is a left hand ruff, then we would play our first note with the left and then two with the right and then primary note with the left. This way sometimes works really well because it's kind of a natural extension from how you would play this, right? So say we had, if we go with this exact same thing, you see that this portion is the same as this portion of this, and we're just adding one note at the beginning, play that with the other hand, and that's a nice way to line these up. Or some people prefer to single these out and play each one as a separate stick. Personally, I use a combination of both, just kind of depending on what sound. If I want them a little bit tighter, a little more smushed together, I'll pick this version. If I want them a little more spread out, a little more articulate, to be able to hear each and every one a little more clearly, then I'll go with this, right? Sometimes, again, just depending on the situation, I would play all three of these as a buzz and then play on one hand, just a longer one than I would up here, and then play the primary note on my left hand, okay? So it gets into the weeds a little bit when we're talking about ornaments, but just to wrap up, just to keep it kind of simple, right? Flams mean we're putting one note in front of the primary note, right? A drag would mean we're putting two notes in front of the primary note, right? And a ruff would mean that we're putting three notes in front of the primary note. Okay? All right, well that is a discussion of flams, drags, and ruffs, the way you'll see them in snare drum music. So make sure you stay tuned to Musician's Edition to catch the flam video and the drag and the ruff videos as well, to see how we actually execute these on the instrument. But this will give you an idea of how to read them in the music, okay? All right, well, good luck with all of that, and I will see you next time.